The question is, outline your party's alcohol policy that will reduce the alcohol damage that is being inflicted on New Zealand babies and children. So we have apologies from Ururoa Flabel, who regrettably is attending the Fovea Strait Tangi also today. But we do have the pleasure of inviting Tim McIndoe, Ian Lee Scalloway, Kevin Haig and Barbara Stewart, who I'll introduce in more detail, but invite them to take a seat now. I'm going to invite each of political colleagues one by one to present their response to that inquiry. They each get 6 or 7 minutes. When they've done that, then I'll invite questions from the floor. So in turn, we have Tim McIndoe, who's the MP, National MP for Hamilton West. He's also the new chair of the Justice and Electoral Select Committee, and as Doug has mentioned, he's lodged a supplementary order for the on-licensed purchase ages to go up for alcohol, which may make the Alcohol 1 reform bill as opposed to the half reform bill. Next to Tim, we have Ian Lee Scalloway from Labour from Palmerston North, Labour spokesperson for mental health and addictions. Next to Ian, we have Ms. Barbara Stewart, New Zealand First Health spokesperson. And next to Barbara, we have Greens, Kevin Haig, health spokesperson. So if I can start off with Tim.
Jeremy, thank you for that introduction. Well-rehearsed arguments of dubious validity, I think you'll find, is the only part of our job description as politicians. So I'll do my best. And I have to say that I'm feeling slightly like the elephant in the room after having to come immediately after Doug's presentation. But here we go. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here and to address your conference on this important topic. And I do sincerely want to acknowledge the dedication you've all shown by being here today and the considerable efforts that I know you're making to tackle the very worrying problems that Doug has just outlined to us and the challenges that our country faces as a result of alcohol abuse, the binge drinking culture, and clearly the inadequacy of our current liquor legislation. During my 3 and a bit years as a Member of Parliament, I've taken a strong interest in alcohol issues generally, and particularly in the disturbing issue of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So I want to applaud the focus and the aims of your conference and assure you that I am dedicated to doing what I can within the parliamentary process to work towards your goals. New Zealand as a country clearly has a drinking problem. There might be disagreement over the scale of it and the solutions to it, but there are few people who argue that we don't have a problem. And that's why the government is committed and has committed to improving the way that New Zealanders deal with alcohol as far as it is possible to deal with it through the legislative process, noting that social and attitudinal changes are also required to go hand in hand with legislation for major improvements to be secured. The Alcohol Reform Bill, which is the first instance, I want to point out to you, in New Zealand's history of alcohol laws actually being strengthened, is a big part of this. It adopts the vast majority of the Law Commission's recommendations, but I acknowledge, as we've just heard from Doug, that some of you will be disappointed that it hasn't adopted all of them. I want to cover some of its main provisions just to reassure you of where we're going with it. The bill removes the ability of liquor stores and bars to trade 24/7, and overwhelmingly the approaches I get and my own impression of it is that's a major thing that needs to change. Bars will have to close as a default position by 4 a.m. I know that's still very late in the evening. And liquor stores will have to cease selling by 11 p.m. But more importantly, the government recognises that one size doesn't fit all. So power over trading hours is going to be put into the hands of local communities. And if a community feels these hours are not right for their needs, they can modify them further through adopting a local alcohol policy. That is warmly welcomed in my hometown of Hamilton, and I personally hope and expect it to happen in many areas around the country. On the question of licensing decisions, the bill will significantly increase the ability of the community to have influence. Currently, the law doesn't allow decision makers to hear many of the concerns people have when yet another bottle store is being proposed for their street, and none of us want to see any more anywhere. Under the bill, a much wider range of concerns can be listened to when deciding whether or not to grant a new liquor licence. With the matter of dairies, the bill makes changes around these and convenience stores selling alcohol. It includes a much more robust test for a grocery store to be granted a liquor licence, and it explicitly bans convenience stores from selling alcohol. Young people are your major focus, and the government is serious about dealing in particular with those who are supplying alcohol to young people. It will require that people giving alcohol to minors have the consent of the young people's parents and that they are responsible in the way that they do it. On the advertising question, the government is looking carefully at this issue. It implements the first of the Law Commission's advertising proposals, the bill does, by significantly widening the current offence of inappropriately or irresponsibly promoting alcohol. This will, among other things, stop advertisements featuring heavy discounts or which are aimed at children. The government is also implementing the second stage of the Law Commission's alcohol advertising proposals, and an independent expert committee, as Doug has mentioned, will be established to look at what further restrictions on alcohol advertising are appropriate. And when the bill is passed by Parliament, it will be required to report back to the government within 1 year. And on the age question, and Doug has mentioned what I'm doing, the bill will also give us a chance to reassess the purchase age for alcohol. This will probably be the only matter subject to a conscience vote amongst MPs. It certainly will be for my caucus, and I presume it will be for most of the other parties here. As Doug has said, I've already put my stake in the ground for what I think needs to happen, and I have, in the last Parliament, lodged a supplementary order paper to increase the purchase age for all categories of alcohol sales back to 20 years. I want to thank many of you in this room and to say how grateful I am for the strong support I've been receiving around the country for that particular measure. And I'm personally convinced that my proposed amendment reflects the wishes of a sizable majority of New Zealanders. However, I'm going to have to work hard to persuade my parliamentary colleagues to support it. I think it's possible, but if I had to say at this stage, I don't think the numbers are there yet. These are just some of the highlights out of a very comprehensive package of reforms. And I know that for some of you, they don't go far enough, but they do significantly advance the goals of the 5+ solution, irrespective. I have to disagree with Doug with some of the comments that he's made. Some would have the government take what others would consider extreme measures, such as banning the sale of alcohol in supermarkets entirely. In fact, as Doug and several others here will know, I'm at the more conservative end of the social and political spectrum on these issues of alcohol reform, and that is one of the reasons why, as many of you are, I'm frustrated that the alcohol reform bill hasn't already been enacted. The government is advancing a package which, am I being wound up? No? Okay. What I'm sure many of you have found when talking to New Zealanders about alcohol is that everyone agrees that we have a problem, but when you drill down with many people, as we as politicians do, mixing with a wide spectrum of society, a common refrain is it's not my problem, it's somebody else's. That's why everyone is against corner stores selling alcohol as long as they can conveniently get their bottle of wine or their pack of beer when they want it. It's why everyone supports tighter trading hours as long as the bars open when they particularly want to go out for a particularly special night or maybe for a champagne breakfast. So when the alcohol reform bill focuses on where the problem is at its core, with heavy, dangerous drinking. It's also focused on young people in particular because of the disproportionate harm heavy drinking can cause them. It's mostly young people who will be conceiving and responsible for the children who are the focus of your conference. So thank you again for having me here. I know I'm about to be pushed off the stage, and may I applaud you all for the work that you are doing on this important topic. We all want to get it right.
We can acknowledge the response from the chair, then if there's a similar response to the electorate, that reassures us. So at this point then I'd like to call Ian Lees-Galloway from Palmerston North, Labour spokesperson for mental health and addictions. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many people attending this conference on what is such an important issue, not just the issue of alcohol and the harm and impact that has on our communities, but very specifically looking at children and young people. I was able to join you from about 1 o'clock today. I conveniently arrived at about lunchtime, like every good politician should. But I've been able to listen to the forums this afternoon, and it's been both enlightening and heartening to hear the conversation. My perspective on this is a little bit different than Tim's, in that he's probably a lot closer to the Alcohol Reform Bill itself, being on the Justice and Electoral Committee. I come more from the health perspective, and I'm, like actually all the other people in front of you, on the Health Select Committee. So we haven't been able to participate quite as closely in the bill process. And I think that's one of the limitations of our parliamentary process. I made the comment during the first reading of the bill that it would be nice to have some super committee where both health and justice people would be able to address the issues in the bill. That's not the way our parliament works at the moment, and unfortunately it's been seen more of a justice issue than a health issue, but I certainly come from the health perspective. During the last term, Labor announced, and Annette King announced, that we were putting children at the centre of our policy. What does that mean? Well, briefly, it meant taking measures to alleviate child poverty, to extend and enhance paid parental leave, to give access to 24/7 free health care for all under sixes, to increase the availability of early childhood education, to ensure that every child is enrolled with a well-child provider of the parent's choice, and to provide more parental support courses such as Incredible Years and the Hippie program and the alike. Now, what does that have to do with alcohol? Well, I think actually listening to Dawn Elder's presentation, what we're trying to achieve is, the words that she used, to optimise the childhood experience for all children. We want to break those cycles, and where families are exceptionally vulnerable, we want to have intensive support for those families. But also just by enrolling people in well-child providers, by having early childhood education being accessible, there are more opportunities for people from outside the family to see what is going on inside the family, and to be alert and aware when abuse and alcohol and other substance abuse is occurring within a family. So it's about that early intervention. It's about being able to get in and provide the services that families need at the very earliest possibility. But of course we know it starts before that. It starts before the early years. It starts from the very moment that baby comes into being. And you talked this morning about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And what we want to see is a health system which is much more focused on health promotion, public health, keeping people well, getting those messages out there. And what we absolutely need is a consistent message, particularly to young people, but to every woman who is pregnant, about the effects of alcohol on their unborn baby, and to get that message through to people that the only safe approach to alcohol when you're pregnant is not to consume alcohol at all. That message is not consistent at the moment, but nor are the resources going into health promotion and public health that we need. We all know about the concept of front-end loading, where people drink up at home before they hit town. We'd like to front-end load the health system so that we don't just wait until people get sick, but we actually have more resources going into keeping people well. And that could certainly go a long way in dealing with the alcohol spectrum disorder issues. So we want to focus on the early years, we want to focus on health promotion, and we want to get into those most vulnerable families, the 5% extremely vulnerable families, and I accept again what Dawn was saying, that vulnerable families are much more than 5% of the population. We would want to put in place extensive intervention and support programs for those families. As children go through life, the impact of alcohol on them shifts from being the impact of other people's drinking to their own drinking. And this, I suppose, is where the Alcohol Reform Bill comes in a lot more. We support the Alcohol Reform Bill. We think everything in the Alcohol Reform Bill is good. We just think there's a whole lot missing from the Alcohol Reform Bill, as Doug referred to. We would like to see the question of minimum pricing addressed now. We want to see the question of tighter restrictions on advertising addressed now, and we want to see the blood alcohol limit reduced from 0.08 to 0.05 now. We don't need any more evidence or research. There's plenty of it already available. We want those... We want those issues addressed now, and we will look to try and address them just as Tim is doing on the age question with a supplementary order paper. We will try to address those as well. How successful we'll be in the process of this bill, we shall wait and see. And we won't just wait, we'll be lobbying the other parties to see what we can do. The other side I'd like to say, I know I'm getting short on time now, is as I said, I come from this from a health perspective. And we, as well as having good health promotion and preventative measures in place, we do need better treatment opportunities available for people as well. We need much more opportunities for early intervention. We support the trial on drug courts because that is one opportunity for early intervention, but there are plenty of others. And the problem at the moment is that the waiting lists for getting into treatment are simply too long, and we need to see more people being able to access treatment for drug and alcohol issues. I'll wrap up there. I did have a little bit more to say, but I know we want to keep moving, and I look forward to your questions.
Good. If I can now invite Green Health spokesperson Kevin Haig, and we shall move on.
Inga mana, inga reo, inga iwi o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Sorry I wasn't here from the beginning of the day. One of my other portfolios is ACC, and I've been a bit busy. So if I lapse into ACC talk at any point, just prod me. My background is in a variety of health services. I immediately becoming a member of Parliament, I was the Chief Executive of the West Coast District Health Board, and previously was the Director of the New Zealand AIDS Foundation and Chair of the Public Health Advisory Committee, a member of the National Health Committee, and lots of other committees for my sins. So my background is very much in public health, and in particular in health promotion. So I was very pleased to see that some of the material that has been presented this afternoon is very consistent with my models for how best to go about some of these issues. In particular, a couple of learnings from public health. Rather than trying to target a particular group, more effective interventions are ones that try to shift the whole population. So rather than focusing on the group of people who have a BMI over 30 or 25, it is more effective to actually try to reduce the weight distribution of the whole population. And you can see where I'm going with this. Actually, if we're wanting to reduce hazardous drinking by the most extreme drinkers, the most effective way of doing that is to actually shift the drinking behaviour of our whole population. A second learning from public health is, and it was great to see Doug put it up there, you know, alcohol education has an effectiveness of 0. And actually, in general, the health education model doesn't work. That actually people are not rational decision makers in general. They do not respond to information deficits by taking on new learning about the benefits and risks of particular courses and then changing their behaviour. The one exception to that, interestingly, is through peer education. So community-based education programs or, say, youth-to-youth programs, actually those can work. But in general, what works is good old Ottawa Charter, and I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with that. I boil down those 5 Ottawa Charter guidelines to a couple of things: empowering communities and creating supportive environments around those communities. So in terms of empowering communities, and I should say, you know, because obviously we're talking largely about the bill here today, and I mean, our sense of the bill is here we have, thanks to Geoffrey Palmer's work, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to actually make a really major change and major difference to alcohol-related harm. And our belief is that we're largely squandering that opportunity, or the government is largely squandering that opportunity. It may be that we're able to shift that process in the House next week, and let's hope that we can do. So in empowering communities, the issues like giving communities control over liquor outlets in their communities, actually that's one of the ways of doing that. Funding community-based initiatives, including, for example, community-based initiatives that are focused around communities taking care of pregnant women. And those are initiatives that would work. The Green Party, we've had an election just recently. You may have noticed that we campaign pretty heavily on a few things: jobs, rivers, kids. And our kids' promises were about largely reducing inequality. And our jobs promises were about developing an economy that is not the goal of our society, but rather a set of tools to enable us to achieve our social goals, like reducing inequality. And so that's, when we come to empowering communities, that's what we're talking about. Actually using economic means to actually change inequality in Aotearoa. In relation to environments, most of the measures that Alcohol Action have prioritised are about that, about changing environments. And so we support, for example, minimum pricing on alcohol. We support progressively increasing excise tax on alcohol. We're really dismayed that John Key immediately dismissed that as a possibility when Geoffrey Palmer's report was published. We're strongly in favour of restricting sales outlets and display of alcohol products within sales outlets. We support mandatory health labelling of alcohol products. And we support a progressive but total prohibition on sales and marketing of alcohol products. The one of the five that we don't totally agree about is purchase age. That will be a vote that Green MPs approach on a conscience basis next week. So there's an opportunity still to persuade us. And on treatment, just briefly, because I've been given the wrap up, we think that there's a very strong opportunity to improve treatment, particularly in primary care. I'm very impressed by the stuff coming out of Whanganui, for example, around what do they call it? Dashboard, a dashboard that's used in primary care to ask about alcohol use, to actually do that screening at that level. And there's the opportunity to make that much more proactive. We certainly want to see greatly enhanced addiction services. And the very last thing I'm going to say is just a reminder, because I know Christine Rogan spoke about this morning, that a health select committee that Barbara and Ian and I are all on is having an inquiry into the health of children, including all factors that influence child health outcomes, including in utero factors, but also preconception factors. Now, to my mind, that opens the door pretty wide, and I'm really encouraging our public health community to be involved in that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin Haig. And if I can invite Barbara Stewart, Health Spokesperson for New Zealand First.
Okay, thank you. you, Jeremy, and thank you, conference delegates, for staying to listen to politicians. It's always interesting to hear what politicians are actually going to say. But thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak at your conference today. Like yourselves, New Zealand First believes that alcohol is the most dangerous drug on the planet, and it's responsible for far more illnesses, deaths, injuries than any other drug that's available. And consequently, we've got an extremely conservative record where alcohol is concerned, and you can go right back through the parliamentary votes, and it is consistently conservative. We voted against decreasing the age at which alcohol can be consumed, and we will continue to do so. So it was pleasing to hear Tim's supplementary order paper that he's going to put through. We voted against the age at which alcohol can be purchased, and we'll continue to do that. We've spoken out and also to the liquor industry, which wasn't very pleasant, I can assure you, about the pricing and the availability of RTDs, drinks that attract our young people like a magnet, unfortunately. Drinks that are as cheap as fizzy drinks and so readily available within our neighbourhoods. The advertising is almost impossible to miss on the pavements, and the price is so affordable for everyone. These drinks are seen as cool, and the packaging helps this perception. We in New Zealand First we're very concerned that our young people drink these drinks like water, and I know my son was actually among one of those that did so. And then they boast about how many that they can drink and the negligible effect that these drinks actually have on them personally. And unfortunately, this type of behaviour is becoming normalised, and it is something that we do not want to see. As you can guess, I am really opposed to these drinks. Younger and younger children are actually consuming these RTDs, and they suffer the effects, which in the long term we all pay for in so many ways. Alcohol in babies and pregnant women must be recognised as ingredients for disaster. They don't mix, and yet individually and collectively these aspects are largely ignored in our health system. It's a very expensive problem, and it's totally overlooked. And it's an absolutely stupid state of affairs, particularly when fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is one of the most preventable birth defects of all. And this problem needs far more action than what has been taken at present. Now, in 2004, some of you will remember, a petition was presented to the Health Select Committee on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and there were a number of very concrete and workable recommendations were made. I was on that select committee at that stage. To date, when I got another copy of the report, there's been absolutely no progress made on implementing any of those recommendations, which is really quite shameful. The recommendations are practical and they're still very relevant. I'm well aware that the government has changed, but that action that was recommended could still be carried out if there was a will. So we believe that it's very timely to revive public interest in the effects of alcohol on women and children and babies, particularly with the bill that's coming through Parliament at the moment. I must tell you, we weren't there for the first reading. We noticed that it has gone through the second reading stage. It's only got a committee stage and the third reading to be completed before it's passed into law. So it is not very far away, unfortunately. And we should all be advocating for far more action to be taken so that the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff is not needed to the extent that it's needed today. We want to see prevention of FASD in New Zealand. We realise that none of the actions are simple and that will all take time, but we have to make a start. We can't afford to ignore the problem and hope that it's going to go away, because the bottom line is it's not. So we need some impetus from groups such as yours to ensure that the politicians sit up and take some notice. we're pretty aware that there are large gaps in the system. One of the ones that is there that we're aware of is that we need trained professionals. There's a shortage to diagnose fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and the prevalence of it, because it needs to be accurately assessed and reported on, because what gets counted actually matters. We know that there is some self-reporting by mothers and expectant mothers, and that has to be encouraged. The adverse health effects have to be publicised during pregnancy. And we've done it with smoking, we've done it with these new road rules, so the same should be able to be done with alcohol. What's the difference? So, just sort of seeing that I have to wrap up, we don't want to see alcohol more readily available. We don't want to see huge advertising boards on the street like there currently is. We want to see the health effects more widely publicised. We want to see increased monitoring and research into FASD, and then the results of that research applied immediately. And we don't want to go into the supermarkets, like I do in my local supermarket, and see bottles of wine beside the Weet-Bix and the breakfast cereals. That is just not good enough. So thank you for your time today, and I'm looking forward to working more closely with your group during this session of Parliament. So thank you.
Now we have the opportunity for an educated audience and electorate to express opinion and to fire inquiries at four politicians here today, with the regrettable absence of unavoidable absence of the Māori Party representative. Now, out of respect, we've held the four here to a brief 7-minute presentation, perhaps an uncharacteristically brief session each. So the questions shouldn't take 7 minutes each. Okay, so looking across and seeing.
I'm Carol, a nurse and midwife. Ask the Labour gentleman, you guys had 9 years in Parliament, why didn't you do any of this?
We instigated the Law Commission review, so that was actually our decision, was to instigate the Law Commission review. We would have liked to have seen it through to the end, but unfortunately the government changed. But yeah, you could argue that we could have started it earlier. The last changes that were made to alcohol law in New Zealand were in 99. So I suppose there was a mood of giving that a little bit of time to see how that worked. As it turned out, some of those changes weren't working very well, so we instigated the Law Commission review, and that's what led to the bill.
Hi. The TPPA is what comes to mind for me when I hear talk of inability to make changes around pricing and taxes, for example, and recognizing the very low level of public exposure to the TPPA, the effect it's going to have, the risks. I'd like, Tim, for you to talk about this openly with us. Thanks.
This is where I'm probably at a bit of a disadvantage in that I'm not on the Health Committee, so I haven't been actively involved in working on it from that aspect. And in fact, I wasn't on the Justice Committee in the last Parliament. So while I'm involved in the process at the moment, I wasn't actually part of the committee that dealt with the bill. So can you just perhaps give me a little bit more clarity around? Yes, but in particular, what is it that, because as I say, I'm just not the person really to be answering that question, is what in particular about it is it that you're wanting me to comment on?
Partly the fact that it hasn't had very much public profile, but secondly, and more importantly... I think I've just demonstrated that. But yeah, more importantly, I think, is the risk that it basically puts New Zealand trying to stop alcohol as a commercial concern to the extent that it currently is within New Zealand by changing legislation, whereby the example that was given this morning if if an industry can show that government legislation change has reduced the commercial viability or interests of an organization or an industry, that industry can sue the government. So that seems like a very quiet, insidious, and underlying motivation for John Key to not want to raise excise tax and minimum pricing as a reform.
So this is the Trans-Pacific
Yeah.
Room to Trade, I think. So back to you, Tim.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, let me just perhaps deal with the issue in the sense that there've been the suggestions made while I've been here, and I'm afraid I've only been able to be here since your afternoon tea break. I haven't heard everything that's happened this morning. But contrary to what is being suggested, this government, and to be fair, I don't think any political party is in the pocket of the liquor industry. I mean, you can put a photograph up of the Prime Minister in front of a display case of beer or something and draw a conclusion from it. But in fact, the Prime Minister's photographed in all sorts of circumstances. The suggestion has been made, for instance, that our party is in receipt of big donations from the liquor industry. I researched that. My understanding is the last time the liquor industry made a significant donation towards a National Party campaign was in 1999. Now, that may well have been in conjunction with the bill that was going through at that time. But the point I make, I understand the Labour Party's had one in 2002. We haven't in the last 12 or 13 years. The real point I want to make is that I reject the idea that we are in the pocket of the liquor industry. Yes, we have been lobbied on this bill, but we get lobbied all the time by all sorts of different industries. All I can say is that I'm determined to do everything I can to fix this problem that we have, and we all acknowledge it's a very significant problem of the dangers that our very disturbing alcohol culture is causing in our community. And I'm not remotely interested in what the Hospitality Association has to say about that, other than I support any moves that they will make towards trying to promote responsible drinking.
From our perspective on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we are not, we're certainly as a party not opposed to free trade agreements. Obviously we signed a free trade agreement with China, but what we are opposed to is anything in that those free trade agreements that would undermine our sovereign right as a nation to set our own public health direction. Now, I know there's some concern that there could be some insidious ways of undermining. There could be some agreement not to undermine our public health legislation or our own ability to set our own policy, and then through other commercial imperatives find ways of overriding that. We're very aware of that, and if we were in charge and we were negotiating, that would be an absolute bottom line for us. There's no way we'd sign up to an agreement that stopped us being able to do our own things on public health.
Can I invite a response from you, Kevin? It looks like you're about to.
Yeah, please, if I may. We are, in general, highly sceptical of free trade agreements. In our experience, they are usually not about trade at all, but they are about restricting our sovereignty. And actually, both Labour and National have been guilty, in our view, of proceeding with free trade agreements to the expense of New Zealand. And the Crayford Farms decision was one that arises actually out of the China free trade.
That's very misleading.
That actually our ability to control that sale was restricted by the provisions of the China Free Trade Agreement. And I think we've seen lots of examples, and you obviously heard about them earlier today, of how free trade agreements have inhibited countries from being able to take good public health measures. And we just have to resist them.
From New Zealand First's point of view, we are very sceptical about the free trade agreements. We don't really believe that they actually enhance our country in many ways at all. But one of the things that really does concern us is the fact that we see cheaper alcohol, cheaper wine coming in from overseas in the supermarkets, and it is a concern when it's bulk bought and it's right there in front of people, and we don't think that it's good enough.
Just a question for the panel to consider, really. Is there any real benefit to any community from the ability to purchase alcohol till 4 a.m. in the morning?
No. No.
Someone else want to go first?
I think that was answered.
Should we take a response from each party?
Just a quick one.
In general, no. But I do remember it was back in the 1970s actually, the Bridgeway Tavern in Auckland had extraordinary opening hours because it was the Wharfies pub. So that's where the Wharfies would go there around dawn each day, and so they had permission to sell alcohol at that time. But you know, we're in favour of restricting hours.
From New Zealand First point of view, we say definitely no. There's no way that we would ever support alcohol outlets being open until 4 a.m. in the morning. There's plenty of hours that people can drink. Why take all of the night hours and enable people to keep on drinking? So we say definitely no.
Look, in Labor, we're pleased that the hours are going to be restricted more than what they are at the moment. Where do you draw the line? That depends on every different person's opinion. And you know, 4 a.m. it's a start.
I think it's important to stress, because my answer to your question is no, quite clearly, but it is important to stress that is the licensed premises. And when we're talking about young people, my experience, and I've got two daughters who are at that age, my experience is that, just as was mentioned earlier, they tend to freeload. I'm not talking about my daughters specifically now, but their age group tend to freeload because they can't afford the prices on licensed premises. And they'll go into town just when we've all gone to bed, quite frankly. That's the norm. So I think it is hugely important that we restrict the hours that they can purchase alcohol from the off-licensed premises. And also, as I've indicated, I want to put it up to 20 as well to limit the chances of 18-year-olds getting alcohol and then supplying to 14 and 15-year-olds, which we know is happening. So I agree with the tenor of your question, but I just want to stress that what we're talking about with that 4 a.m., which is a default position, is for licensed premises, and my hope is that under the local area plans, the vast majority of areas will actually go to an earlier time than that. I personally would strongly encourage them to do that.
Thank you. I hope we can turn that consensus into action.
Can I ask Tim, why the government didn't do it the other way round? Why not have a more conservative default, but allow local groups to be able to liberalise it further if they wanted it? Why do it that way?
Yeah, that's a fair question, Doug, and I don't know the answer because, as I say, I wasn't on the committee at the time of the bill, but it has been mentioned earlier that yes, the bill is coming back. I don't know exactly when, but I'm assuming it is fairly soon. The bill is coming back, and there is the potential for further amendments. What is out there at the moment is a significant step down the path, but it's not all done and dusted. And that just as my amendment will have to be debated, there is the potential for further amendments to the bill under the supplementary order paper system that we have. Barbara mentioned that we're at the committee stages, and so we're nearly there. In fact, the committee stages are the really grunty stages, and they'll take a while, but they need to take a while, and I know that you'll all be following it very closely, and I encourage you to do so and lobby us as we're going through it.
Yes.
Can I just ask if when you're discussing like things that you would like to have happen at the moment, and particularly how you'd like to have the bill enacted, it seems like you're coming up against various obstacles that make this difficult and make it take longer than you'd like. And you said earlier that there was very little lobbying happening in the parties at the moment, particularly from the Hospitality Association. But even though if you look overseas, like particularly America, it comes out that lobbying is extremely prevalent over there at least. I can't figure out why that would be any different here. So if you put the two things together, this difficulty and the long-winded nature of enacting what seems to be quite a straightforward set of recommendations, and the overseas experience of the high rates of lobbying in government systems, I can't help but what makes this so difficult and take so long when the evidence seems to be so conclusive.
I think we'll accept answers from all four parties on that point, since they've all seen quite a long haul in this process.
I'll answer you first, we would have liked to have seen a speedier process. As I outlined in my contribution, there's probably places where we would have gone further if we had introduced the bill to the House. There was a large, very, very large number of submissions to the Select Committee. That in itself slowed the process down, and they were submissions from all different perspectives, but interestingly people from all different perspectives really wanted to come in and speak to the Select Committee, and as I say, although I'm not a permanent member of the Select Committee that actually reviewed the bill, there were so many submissions that a lot of us were subbing in to relieve our colleagues from the hours and hours and hours of Select Committee time hearing those submissions. So that's been a process which has slowed it down. But to be honest with you, I think we could have got through this in the last term before the election. It's the government that determines the pace of legislation, so I'll leave that one to Tim.
Actually, I'll remind you of that comment during the committee stages, Ian. It certainly hasn't been my process that it's the government that controls the pace of legislation. I don't think I said that there hadn't been much lobbying. I think what I said was that we get lobbied by everybody, that it's a very widespread thing. So it's not just the Hospitality Association. I did acknowledge that I've been lobbied by the Hospitality Association. I'm assuming that every MP on stage has. Ian is right in what he has said, though, about the process. Can I just point out to you that the Law Commission's original document was about as thick as the Wellington telephone book. It then went out for public consultation. I held meetings in my electorate, and I know that Doug came to Hamilton and had a very good meeting as well. I was at that meeting. There was a lot of consultation. That then came back for this, and then it resulted in the final report from the Law Commission, which was as thick as the Auckland telephone directory. That then was presented to the government, and it did take a while because it was a huge thing to be converted into a legislative response. Then that had to go out for the public consultations once it had had its first reading. So while I know that the public sometimes think, why on earth is this dragging along, it has been a very thorough process. And while I share your frustration that it isn't already enacted, I really do, I'm hopeful that we'll get a better bill out of it for the fact that it's taken a little bit longer. But we need to make sure that we continue to see it through, and the committee stages are going to be very important.
I think the points that Tim makes about what makes the process take a long time, and Ian's points too about the number of submissions that went to the Select Committee, I think they're fair points. I mean, it has been frustrating for it to take so long. And as I said earlier, this is really a once in a generation opportunity to actually get this right, and so it is reasonable for time to be taken, provided that adds value. And I guess the thing that concerns me is that having taken all of that time, and with this unique opportunity, the bill that has emerged is so timid. That's my frustration with it.
From the New Zealand First perspective, we've had a look at the bill because we weren't there last time to hear the submissions or be a part of it, and we believe it's a bit like a Clayton's bill. Doesn't really alter too much, unfortunately. We would like to have seen it go further, but we'll be voting. Our voting record will be very conservative when it comes to all parts of it.
Thank you. So a long time coming, and we sincerely hope it won't be an anticlimax. Now I invite Jenny. Question?
Hi, I'm Jenny Connor from University of Otago. And I have a question for Ian. When he was talking, he started talking about taking a public health approach to this problem that we all acknowledge that we have. And I wrote down a question which was to ask him what he thought the public health approach was. And then Kevin got up and explained to us a public health approach, or at least a framework for a public health approach. And I have to say I agree with Kevin's emphasis on building supportive environments and empowering communities as the most important strands. But the first strand, unless I misremember it, is healthy public policy. And actually, when you look at the evidence, I mean, the Ottawa Charter is a theoretical framework. When you look at the evidence is about healthy public policy. That's what creates the supportive environment. So I think, we have to go back to the public policy. All of the there are so many things in the bill that might be quite good. Local alcohol policies might be quite good and so on, but they're not going to create a huge sea change in drinking in this country. Healthy public policy will do that. We do have a blueprint for it. You know, it's been thrashed out, as Tim has explained, and they did a great job. You know, all of the people in this room probably put a lot of their own time and effort into the Law Commission's report. So my question for Ian is, what is it about what Kevin said, what Kevin laid out, that the Labour Party would disagree with?
None of it.
Nothing at all.
No,
So
I
the
think
Greens and the Labour Party are exactly on the same page.
we would be in a very similar position until we venture into trade agreements, maybe. But we would be in a very, very similar position on public health policy.
Okay. So that's a real change in direction for the Labour Party. I mean, I have been, just before you answer that, I've been involved in at least a couple of election cycles, trying to get information from political parties about their alcohol policy. The answers have generally been they don't have any, including the Labour Party. There's never been any suggestion that they were going to take a public health approach. This is prior to the Law Commission. So
Right,
this is a real departure.
Yeah, and look, that's why we, as I said, the very first question was, you know, and my answer was we instigated the Law Commission's report. There's a real drive within our caucus, and I don't know whether this is a new thing or not because I'm only in my second term, but there's a real drive in our caucus for evidence-based policy making and around health that's no different than any other policy sphere. So the mood within the Labour caucus at the moment is evidence-based and strong public healthcare policy.
Okay, so can I just clarify, if it was a Labour bill, would include all the key elements on that half-a-page summary? I mean, it's a big report, but it's a half-page summary of the key, most important elements. They would all be there.
I can't remember everything exactly on the
Well,
page,
they were
but
the same
as I said, things like
yeah.
minimum pricing would be in there, greater restriction on advertising would be in there. We would have taken the bill a lot further than what it is at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Heard it here, write it down.
Yeah,
I'd like to take a final question.
Good afternoon. And I've got so many questions, but I'm going to try and merge them all into one just to confuse you. No. But I do want to follow up on what Jenny said. Recently come back from a global alcohol policy conference in Thailand, and it is universal agreement. We have the evidence. We have public support. The barrier for us is you guys. You guys need to sort your element out. So my first question is rather rhetorical. Can you go away and think what you guys have to do to help us sort this? Because I believe we've done our job, and we've done it really, really well. But my real question, you don't have to answer that one. My real question touches on a few things. One of them is inequalities. Alcohol expresses inequalities thick in our communities. Young people, Māori, you name it, they experience inequalities around alcohol. Within the treatment sectors, they don't get service. Young people, Māori, they wait, they don't get service. Density issues concentrated in lower socioeconomic communities. Marketing, targeting our young people. I could go on. I could stand here all afternoon. It's over already, by the way. So my question is, most of the alcohol industry in New Zealand is owned by international multi-global corporates. We have talked a lot about today about handing things over to communities. So I throw the question to you about the ethics of handing over control to communities in an environment that we have.
If we look at the free trade agreement, sort of picking up on your sort of multinational issue, I mean, the point that I make in a sort of a bigger presentation than I've given today is that the point of free trade agreements is to give big capital wherever it is in the world, and it typically is in multinational settings, like so rather than a specific country, access to the cheapest labour and the raw materials which we might otherwise call the natural world with the least restriction, and actually markets for their products wherever those are most convenient for them. So in other words, free trade agreements in general facilitate a race to the bottom. So the kind of destruction that we see at a community level from these multinational companies operating in our country is not some unintended consequence, that's actually how it's supposed to work. Second point, the issue you raise around, I guess, gradient and socioeconomic status and ethnicity around alcohol. If I give a longer presentation about health promotion, my starting point is usually take a disease, let's map where it is and where it isn't in New Zealand, which communities. Then take the next disease, put those on the same map, and then the next disease, and put those on the same map. And well, hey, what a surprise. They're all clustered in exactly those communities. And then if we were to actually draw a map of where are the alcohol outlets clustered, and they would be clustered in the same places. So I agree very strongly with the point that you make. And actually, the health promotion approach essentially says, actually deal first of all, create an equal society. Actually, that will deal with a whole lot of our problems. And actually, that kind of approach of empowering communities and creating supportive environments produces gains not only in the thing you started off to try and improve, but actually everything else. So it's incredibly important. Now, I appreciate I haven't addressed that ethical issue. That I'm not talking about, and the Ottawa Charter doesn't talk about just handing things over to communities saying it's your problem now. Actually, I always interpret it as states, because Ottawa Charter is an action program for states, getting alongside communities and providing them the resources that they need in all sorts of ways, financial resource, but also access to expertise about what works, what doesn't, what other communities have done, and so on, to assist them to identify the problems they want to work on and to implement interventions to deal with them. So I think that's ethically sound.
Can we move to Barbara? So, acting locally, shackled globally.
Yes. Okay, when it comes to communities, we do agree that communities should have greater power than what they presently do, particularly when it comes to the number of alcohol outlets that are placed in the neighbourhoods and by schools. We think that they should be restricted. We need to ensure our communities actually have the resources to ensure that they can carry out monitoring what's happening in their community. I know in my local area I'd like to see the advertising limited, huge blackboards with what's on special, cheap, that everybody can afford. So, that's an area I think that communities should have greater say, but I think one of the things that we need to talk to our local communities about, and in supermarkets in particular, is where they actually place the wine in the store, so that it is not the first thing that you come to after the fruit and the vegetables. It is right somewhere else, totally different. I totally object to going and buying my Weet-Bix right beside the wine, quite frankly. So, I think we should empower communities, but we need to ensure that they do have the resources. And we need to monitor what's happening too.
Thank you, Barbara. Move to you.
Yeah, look, I would open by saying that I don't think it matters who owns the liquor industry, who's actually supplying the liquor. Whoever it is, whether it's a multinational corporation or whether it's a local company, will play by the rules that are set by the government. They'll probably take those rules to the extreme and they'll find ways of bending them. But it doesn't matter who actually owns the business. We'd like to think that a local company might feel more invested in their local community. There's probably some truth in that, but it comes down to what what environment we set, which was the question that you asked about the environment that we set. The current environment is, as Geoffrey Palmer said, unbridled commercialisation of alcohol. And what we should be doing is trying to step away from that position of unbridled commercialisation. So, if we change the settings around price, and we change the settings around advertising, we change the settings around blood alcohol limit, and some of the things that we are changing, like Barbara's concerned about wine being placed next to Weet-Bix. That is actually in the bill, that wine can only be sold from one part of the supermarket. I know some people would like to see it out of supermarkets altogether, but changing those settings to change the environment, and then working alongside communities on things like density of outlets, the opening hours, that's what we should be trying to achieve. And I guess what you're saying, and what a lot of us feel, is that the bill doesn't go far enough in creating the environment whereby local communities will be empowered to undertake the responsibilities that are being passed on to them. And I can only repeat that we would like to see the bill stronger than it is.
Thank you, Ian. And final comments from yourself, too.
There certainly was a lot in what you had to say there. I agree with a lot of what Ian has just said. See, just as an aside, can I point out that the blood alcohol question, important as it is a road safety measure. It's not actually part of the alcohol reform bill at all, but it will be coming back to board before Parliament. It's just not in that particular bill. I think you make a very good point about the impact of alcohol in areas of greatest vulnerability. And that is why, for all of the fact that I'm certainly picking it up that many of you are disappointed that the bill doesn't go further than it does, I think that the local area plan, the local alcohol plans, are a very significant part of it, and I really encourage you to keep putting pressure on the local areas. It's the first time ever that local areas will be able to say, we do not want in, say, this low decile area or this area where we know there are a lot of problems of addiction and all sorts of problems. We do not want any more bottle stores. We do not want this sort of constant problem, this proliferation of alcohol outside schools and libraries and all the rest of it. This gives you a chance to change that. I just want to be a little bit more optimistic. I actually think that there's a huge amount in the bill that is going to make a really big difference. But I come back to a point that I made in my speech, that legislation alone will not solve the problem. We have got to do far more in our communities, in our families, to change the culture. I, as a parent, am really, really worried about the attitude that young people are demonstrating towards alcohol.
Legislation changed the culture around smoking. You need strong legislation to start culture change. It won't come otherwise.
Well, and the point I'm making to you is that I think legislation is a lot stronger than you're giving it credit for, but I understand the concerns that you have, and I share some of those concerns. I still want to make the point, though, that legislation alone will not do it. It's a very big part of a bigger problem, and I really hope and pray that we're going to find the solution across the social perspective as well as the legislative perspective, because it's a huge problem for all of us.
Thank you, too.